Good morning, and welcome to your morning cereal. Okay, good morning, and welcome to Monday. I hope you had a fantastic weekend and you just weren't wishing it away to get to today. Why? Because today is National Cabbage Day. It only comes once a year, folks, so enjoy it. And today is also National Family Day, National Random Acts of Kindness Day. So those are both great days for us to focus on. And of course, it's President's Day. And because of that, maybe you have the day off of work. But you might be surprised to know that that was the point. Way back in 1971, President's Day moved in an effort to create more three-day weekends for the public, in the hope that this would inspire greater productivity nationwide. It was believed that at this point in the year, the restorative effects of the winter holidays have already begun to fade, and people needed another break to regain some of that lost stamina. So, yes, please. Can I have more, please? Okay, well, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with today's quotes and one fun nostalgic quote, and then a second quote to tease our book review later in the episode. Hopefully, one of these quotes will speak to you, jumpstart your day and your week in a positive direction. The first quote is from Michael Jordan. And quick side note, if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm a Gen Xer that grew up watching Michael Jordan become Michael Jordan. And I had every square inch of my room covered in Jordan posters. So I realize I'm a bit biased here, but it's hard to argue about him not being the GOAT. But it's even harder to argue about him not having an incredible work ethic. He was known as one of the hardest workers ever to play. Well, Michael has lots of quotes about success and failure, but the one I picked for today is this. Michael said, quote, "Some people want it to happen. Some people wish it would happen. Others make it happen," end quote. So get out there and make it happen. And today's teaser quote from the book review is, quote, "Nothing good is accomplished and a lot of damage can be done if you tell a person straight out that he or she is wrong. You only succeed in stripping that person of self-dignity," end quote. And we'll go ahead and unpack that here in just a minute during the book review segment. But first, let's jump into our usual dose of fun and historic facts from this day in history. Today's news facts and birthdays are for February 17th. Back in 1876, some of you might be super happy about this, but I'm not. Sardines were first canned by Julius Wolfe in Eastport, May. Then in 1897, the National Congress of Parents and Teachers, better known as the Parent-Teacher Association, the PTA, it was founded in Washington, D.C. as the National Congress of Mothers. In 1938, the first public experimental demonstration of Baird color TV in London, it laid the foundation for color TV as we know it. Then in 1972, the car, the Beetle, it overtook the Model T as the world's best-selling car. Then jumping up to 1992, convicted serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms for the series of gruesome murders that he had committed. Then in 2014, American comedian Jimmy Fallon, he began hosting The Tonight Show, replacing Jay Leno. Then lastly, in 2017, the discovery of a new, mostly underwater continent named Zealandia in the South Pacific was announced. It was announced in the research journal GSA Today. I think this is incredibly cool. Apparently, it's half the size of Australia, and it's the largest of the microcontinents. So there's that. All right. Well, happy birthday if your birthday is today. You share a birthday with a family favorite in our house, singer Ed Sheeran. He turns 34 today. Socialite Paris Hilton, she's 44. Lead singer of Green Day, Billie Joe Armstrong, he's 53 today. Then producer Michael Bay, he's 60. And of course, the GOAT, Michael Jordan, he's 62 today. The show today has been highlighting some of my favorites, and the number one song on this day is no different. It's from 1985, and it's the song Careless Whisper by Wham, featuring George Michael. Okay, depending on my mood, this song is one of my favorite songs of all time. The vibe, the feel, the saxophone, it's an incredible song. And incredibly, George Michael wrote this song when he was just 17 years old, and he made it up while he was riding a bus. Well, George Michael also wrote the saxophone solo in this song, and he said he got more praise about that famous saxophone solo than any of his writing up to that point in his career. To this day, George Michael says he's unsure why the song was such a big hit, but it was his biggest hit as a part of Wham and as a solo artist. And at over 11 million copies sold, it's one of the biggest selling singles of all time. And the number one movie on this date in 1995 was Billy Madison, an Adam Sandler movie back when he was just starting to put together a string of comedy hits after hit. Happy Gilmore followed this movie in 1996. But Billy Madison, High Level, the movie is about a rich 20-something-year-old Billy Madison, Sandler's character, who goes back to finish each grade in school as an adult to prove to his rich father that he can do it. And you throw in some cute kids and a romance with the teacher, and it becomes a comedy classic. Chris Farley had a cameo, as did Steve Buscemi, and Robert De Niro says it's his favorite movie of all time. Okay, let's move on to some personal growth in the book review segment of Morning Serial. This is where we take a few moments to reflect on lessons learned from the current book we're reading. And currently, we're reading through Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a timeless book that is consistently in all the must-read lists, and it's packed with rock-solid advice and actions for all of us to use and build healthy foundational concepts to live by. And today, we are finishing up Chapter 2 of Part 2, which is entitled A Sure Way of Making Enemies and How to Avoid It. Carnegie began this chapter by revealing the art in conversations, whether we are right or wrong. We are learning that it's difficult to change someone's way of thinking and their beliefs. They are deeply held, and they are associated with their self-esteem. And as such, people will cling to them, even unreasonably. So we need to artfully approach these conversations. Carnegie says it well, saying, quote, "When we are wrong, we may admit it to ourselves. And if we are handled gently and tactfully, we may admit it to others, but not if someone else is trying to ram the unpalatable fact down our esophagus." End quote. Carnegie provides two real-world examples of these methods, and he suggests these examples are typical experiences of thousands of people. The first example is about a woman who approached a business meeting with a new way of providing incentives to her employees. And she initially prepared and spent her time showing management how the current system was wrong and that she had all the answers to fix it. Well, that fell flat. Once she realized her mistake of basically telling other people they were wrong, in the next meeting, she led them little by little through points of concern with the current system. And with timely, low-key suggestions, she eventually led them to her conclusions, which they then gladly accepted. Here's what she said she learned from that experience. Quote, "I am convinced now that nothing good is accomplished and a lot of damage can be done if you tell a person straight out that he or she is wrong. You only succeed in stripping that person of self-dignity and making yourself an unwelcome part of any discussion." End quote. In the second example, a lumber salesman was dealing with an inspector at a company that believed the lumber delivery was not up to grade. Historically, the lumber salesman was fiery and combative, and often he won those types of arguments based on his knowledge of the lumber grades, but often still the lumber would be returned. After taking Carnegie's course, the lumber salesman used a different approach. And in the next situation, he had the inspector keep unloading the truck, and he asked the inspector to set aside each piece that did not meet grade. And he was careful to say that they did not have to accept anything that was not up to standard. Well, the inspector began to warm up after a bit, given the salesman was not looking to argue, and the salesman said, quote, "An occasional, carefully put remark on my part gave birth to the idea in his mind that possibly some of these rejected pieces were actually within grade that they had bought," end quote. Note here, as we talk about the art in the conversation, the salesman said his carefully placed and timed remarks gave birth to the idea in the inspector's mind. The art is to lead others down a path, sowing unnoticed seeds, where the other person begins to see and believe your idea is their own idea, or at least your perspective begins to dawn on them. So the lumber salesman summed up his experience like this, quote, "In that one instance alone, a little tact and the determination to refrain from telling the other man he was wrong," end quote, saved his company the sell and money, and that, quote, it would be hard to place a money value on the goodwill that was saved, end quote. So Carnegie closes out chapter 2, making the point that we need to adjust our perceptions of people that we are disagreeing with. We shouldn't look at them as the enemy and treat them as the enemy. Carnegie quotes Martin Luther King, who said of a man that had different views than him, quote, "I judge people by their own principles, not by my own," end quote. And Carnegie says that this chapter is only supporting principles that have been around for thousands of years. And Carnegie quotes Jesus again, saying, quote, "Agree with thine adversary quickly," end quote. And 2,200 years before Christ, an Egyptian king told his son, quote, "Be diplomatic. It will help you gain your point," end quote. Carnegie sums up the chapter saying, quote, "In other words, don't argue with your customers or your spouse or your adversary. Don't tell them they are wrong. Don't get them stirred up. Use a little diplomacy," end quote. Chapter 2 is entitled A Sure Way of Making Enemies and How to Avoid It. And Carnegie's principle number 2 is show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say you are wrong. Isn't the human psyche so interesting? Sometimes we really do boil down to just simple concepts like self-worth. Well, I hope your self-worth is high this Monday and your week is off to a fantastic start. And I forgot to mention, it's also National Pancake Day. So if you haven't had breakfast yet, I'm sure the International House of Pancakes has some killer deals today. We start chapter 3 tomorrow, entitled, If You're Wrong, Admit It. So come back for that. Now, go out there today and be like Mike and make it happen today. Thanks for joining and have a fantastic day. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Morning Serial podcast on the One Life Live It channel. You can find more episodes and videos by visiting our YouTube channel and the website at Sean Inglis and at SeanInglis.com, where you can also follow our other podcasts, the Mr. and Mrs. Inglis podcast and the Life Happens podcast. In these other podcasts, we'll dive deeper into everyday issues, self-improvement and well-being, business and finance, and we welcome special guests too. So join us. It'll be a good time, I promise. Thanks again for listening. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you tomorrow.